Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the really fascinating mechanics behind a specific framework called inductive Bible study. Let's be honest, trying to understand ancient literature is notoriously tricky. We are separated from these texts by this massive gap in time, language, geography, and culture. And crossing that gap, well, it requires a reliable bridge. So whether you're a seasoned scholar, a theology student, or honestly just someone curious about how we actually pull meaning out of historical literature, we're going to look at exactly how to read a text on its own terms, instead of just imposing our own terms right on top of it.
So, let's kick things off with a pretty tough question. Have you ever read an article, maybe a historical document or a piece of scripture, and just miraculously it perfectly agreed with absolutely everything you already believed? We've all been there. It's a universal human experience that is deeply rooted in what psychologists call confirmation bias. We just naturally bring our own prejudices or cultural backgrounds and our blind spots to the things we read. Because, let's face it feels really good to be validated. We inherently want the text to agree with us and confirm our pre-existing worldview. But from an academic and interpretive standpoint, falling into that comfortable little trap is incredibly dangerous.
It's exactly what Dr. David Bauer calls intellectual ventriloquism. And honestly, that is just the perfect image. Think about what a ventriloquist actually does. They project their own voice into this lifeless dummy, making it look like the dummy is the one speaking, when really it's just the ventriloquist talking to themselves. Well, when we project our own ideas into a text, only to just read them right back out again, we are doing the exact same thing. We aren't really listening to the text at all. We're just using it as a prop for our own voice. The text literally becomes nothing more than a passive echo chamber for our modern opinions.
So, to solve this problem, we're going to walk through the history, the philosophy, and the academic rigor of inductive Bible study, or IBS. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll look at textual ventriloquism, reclaiming the final form, the science of meaning, letting the text speak, and finally, interpretation before application. Let's get right into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the danger of textual ventriloquism, and how we actually protect the text from ourselves.
Yeah, you heard that right. The core concept here is that the text actually needs to be protected from us. Like we just talked about, our natural reflex is to use ancient texts to validate our modern worldview instead of letting them challenge us. But an inductive approach is highly intentional about stopping that process in its tracks. It demands this rigorous self-awareness where we actively block our own assumptions from taking the driver's seat. And how do we do that? By intentionally slowing down. We have to prioritize deep, methodical observation way above our instinct to immediately react or judge. We basically have to give the text the space to speak its own distinct and often challenging message, even if it totally contradicts what we brought to the table.
Moving right along to Section 2, reclaiming the final form. Here, we're going to trace a really major historical shift. It is kind of wild to see how inductive Bible study grew from a specific university setting into this globally respected academic framework. It all started back in the late 19th century at Yale University with a Hebrew professor named William Rainey Harper. Then, his student Wilbur White took those ideas and really put them to the test. White actually traveled to India and discovered that this inductive method was incredibly effective across completely different cultures. And that's precisely because it focuses on the text itself rather than our cultural baggage. White eventually founded a seminary in New York just to teach it. And throughout the 20th century, this method heavily influenced some of the most renowned scholars globally, like Brevard Childs at Princeton. It became this incredible bridge between accessible reading and highly rigorous academic scholarship. So why did this catch on like wildfire? Well, back when Harper was teaching at Yale, the dominant academic trend was something called historical criticism. This meant dissecting the text, trying to reconstruct these lost, earlier written sources that the authors might have used. It was literally like tearing a car apart to look at the individual factory parts, just trying to guess how the car was originally built. But Harper noticed his students were getting incredibly bored dissecting texts they didn't even have access to. The inductive approach completely flipped the script and ignited their excitement by shifting the focus back to engaging directly with the text in its final form. Suddenly, they were engaging with the completed, polished document exactly as it stands.
Which brings us to Section 3, the science of meaning and the absolute necessity of suspecting ourselves.
Okay, before we go any further, let's define a foundational term you're going to hear a lot. Hermeneutics. It sounds super academic, I know, but it is simply the science of meaning. In biblical study, hermeneutics is just the task and the process of how we derive meaning from a text. Think about it like reading a text message from a good friend. To understand what they mean, you automatically process their tone, the context of your relationship, and the specific words they typed out, right? You're doing everyday hermeneutics. In academic study, it's the exact same concept, just formalized. It is literally the engine under the hood of interpretation. Now, a lot of modern academic practitioners today use what's called a hermeneutic of suspicion. Basically, they approach a text highly suspicious of it, judging it for potential oppression, injustice, or violence. They interrogate the text, essentially pointing a finger right at it. But the inductive approach? It flips that completely. Instead of suspecting the text, it uses a hermeneutic that suspects ourselves. It requires us to hold up a mirror. We must exercise deep self-criticism and constantly pause to ask, wait, am I reading my own cultural agenda into this passage? Am I projecting my own modern values onto an ancient document? It takes the burden of scrutiny off the text and puts it squarely onto the reader. All right, section 4, letting the text speak. Let's look at the actual nature of the Bible itself. The whole inductive method operates on one massive assumption. You have to let the text tell you how to read it. And for this text, there are 3 unignorable realities. First, it's deeply historical. It's a mega-narrative grounded in specific times, written by specific people, to specific audiences dealing with very real specific problems. Second, it's explicitly literary. It communicates through written literature, meaning you absolutely have to study its grammar, its structure, and the specific genres it's using. And third, it is undeniably theological. From beginning to end, the primary overarching concern is God. You just cannot study this text accurately if you ignore its historical roots, bypass its literary structure, or dismiss its theological purpose. Because of that strong theological nature, the text claims to be a transcendent revelation. Just look at Isaiah 55. It explicitly says its thoughts are higher than human thoughts, and its ways are higher than human ways. It is fundamentally countercultural, no matter what century or what culture you happen to be living in. Trying to understand a message that claims to be that much higher than our own native thoughts, that requires intense, serious effort. This isn't passive reading, folks. You can't just skim it. It takes an active, vigorous, and structured method to pull that meaning out accurately without totally distorting it. And that brings us to our final stop, Section 5, Interpretation Before Application. This is the ultimate golden rule for this entire practice. There is a strict, non-negotiable order here. Step 1, you absolutely must discover the precise, specific, past historical meaning. You have to ask, what did the author intend to communicate to their original audience back in their original time? Now, the temptation is always to skip this step, because let's be real, we're impatient, we want immediate relevance for our lives today. But only after you have nailed down that historical meaning can you move to step 2. Which is relating that original meaning to your contemporary situation. Interpretation must always precede and fully determine the application. To put it simply, present meaning must remain in continuity with past historical meaning. Think of it like a bridge. The historical meaning is the foundation on one side, and your modern application is the foundation on the other. If we just jump straight to application without doing the historical interpretation, we fracture the text and completely break that bridge. Dr. Bauer makes a great point here. If a speaker proclaims the ultimate authority of a text, but then gives an application that directly contradicts the original meaning of that text, their functional authority is 0. They have fallen right back into that trap of textual ventriloquism, using the text to just say whatever they want it to say. So, approaching a text inductively isn't just some dry academic exercise reserved for seminaries. It's actually a fundamental posture of respect toward the material you're reading. It requires actively suspending our own agendas, understanding the text in its original context, and doing the really hard work to make sure our modern applications are firmly anchored in ancient truths. I want to leave you with this final thought. The next time you open a text, any text at all, ask yourself, are you truly listening to its voice, or are you just listening to the echo of your own? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.